was just so warm and toasty to think about that. And then whatever this mess has been, go back to March 2020. Pandemic starts up, couldn't find cleaning supplies, paper products, canned foods, stay-at-home orders. People are sick and dying, and thousands of people. Of course, economic stress, the protests, murder hornets, and at some point an asteroid barely missed us. So that was, I guess, the bright spot of 2020. So what happened to predictability? In 2019, we had a script. And think of it, if you would, like a movie script. It's all laid out. It's got a plan. It's got an arc. And sometimes things pop up. Sometimes get cut out of the movie. Sometimes they stay in. And that's kind of like the consistent flavor is mostly things stay the same. But about 15 months ago, we had a shock to our script, a shock to our system. Outside forces came in and made us reconsider a lot of things, maybe nearly everything. The script that changed was more like a TV series at that point, where you're being handed a new script every day. There's lots of moving parts, changing plot lines. We need to be nimble and give up a lot of control. And let's not make any small point about how the change was dramatic. We can say it was work from home. And we all know that wasn't that simple for a lot of folks. It was living at work and being a full-time teacher and or child care provider and or elder care provider. That's a lot of things that were previously up to multiple different people to handle. Now it's on one person or one household. That's just plain a lot. Usually the shock isn't on a societal scale. Usually shocks are maybe a new boss, a promotion, you get a new board, which can always be interesting, grant that's approved or not funded, new life partner, new kiddo, all the things you would expect as a normal course of life that you don't necessarily predict all the time, but it's definitely something that could create that jostle. So that's the most general intro to burnout and things that change. What I want you to do is we're having a breakout just now, just this second, put in the chat a link, because whenever we go to breakout, at least I do, the presenter says, hey, here's what we're going to talk about in the breakout. Everybody goes, yeah, that's awesome. You go to the breakout and everybody says, what are we doing again? So now we have a URL. You can click that, go to the first breakout topic, which is and will be in the last year. What has most shocked your script that's had a lasting impact? Due to having the wee little window on the side. Are we all back? That's close enough to it. So good. All right. So we'll proceed. And I don't want to do necessarily the share back out just yet, but I definitely want to hear stories once we get to the end and the time that we have a lot of Q&A discussion. So usual change, like I said, things change, things go on. Usually we start off in this, we have a curve. And the first thing is the honeymoon. I'm sure you've heard of the honeymoon phase, where you've made a choice, you made a decision, and oh my gosh, everybody sings the same song at the same time. It's like, yeah, part of the team, this is so good. And then as you can follow the arc, things tend to fade out. And I don't want to put something so terminally sad as depression in the bottom, but I call it reality in HD, because I like to think that most people know going in, it's not all going to be rainbows, unicorns, and puppies, but they're enjoying it, but they know something else is coming. But sometimes that reality is a whole lot more crystal clear than they even anticipated. And so when you get to that moment, oftentimes people do come back up out of it. They adapt from what they thought in the honeymoon phase to what they saw or experienced in reality, then back up to adapting, making things work, and then maintain, knowing that nothing can be perfect, of course, and it can be nearly as exciting as when you first started. But there's the highs and lows of just daily life, and that's just how we live life. Alternatively, there's another curve. And sometimes when folks hit that bottom end, the reality in HD, there's adaptation, but it doesn't quite take root. And then there's disconnection and diversion and intolerance. So if you imagine somebody's going on this path and they're adapting and they start to disconnect, and diversion is not just diverting your attention, but diverting away from the core of the group, away from your reason you got into this situation in the first place. And tolerance stinks in this case. It's that situation where you wake up in the morning because your alarm goes off and you want to throw it across the room, and your stomach says, do we have to do this again? And you get up and you go to work because that's what you're supposed to do, or you go to your whatever the situation is. It's just, you deal with it, and that's not a great place to be. So why burnout? It's a canary in the coal mine. It's paying attention to your feelings, your emotions, not dismissing it, and not saying, well, everybody has a bad day, or once this project is done, life will be better, or I should just get more sleep or more exercise. That'll fix everything. Those are good things, but sometimes it's even bigger than that. So it's about taking some action and changing behavior that can really help out. And when you think about yourself, think about your team, other employees, maybe your peers, in this image here, the pivoting, we've used pivot a lot, but I'm still using it. So that's how we're going to go. Is the pivot going to be 1 foot out the door, or pivot and get that foot back in the center of the organization? How's that change going to happen? Because change is needed. If burnout is coming, it's definitely going to require some kind of intervention, either internal or external. And so I want you to think about your situation. And I'll read these out loud, I think mostly to give us time to think on it. But if you have access to it, you can probably see just fine. Which of these things fit you? 1 to 5, 1 is disagree, 5 is agree. I feel opportunity to learn in my job. I enjoy the people I work with. I participate in policy decisions. My job expectations are clear to me. I'm free of paperwork and red tape. Working with customers and clients can be very stressful, and I receive recognition for a job well done. So I mentioned my dissertation. Among the many questions that my participants responded to, these were the selection, slightly modified, about burnout. And they speak to burnout because, look at number 5. Nobody's free of paperwork and red tape, but if that's the thing that you think about as your job being, it can be rough. Think about how to proceed. So you need to calculate, but if you looked at the questions, you've got like 4 where you're 1 or a 2, maybe it's time to step back and evaluate what's going on with your situation. So if you lost the spark, and this is somebody else's work, I give them full citation because it's really good work, and I don't steal from people. There's that too. So recognize burnout by observing your own behavior. And you may be falling out of love with work if you don't get excited about it, you stop putting in effort, or just enough to not get fired. Yes, I'm meeting all the minimums perfectly. Thank you for asking. Your performance is suffering, errors, not meeting deadlines, and so on. You're totally exhausted all the time. You're dealing with physical ailments. And this is a piece I'm not sure folks always think about. The examples that you see here, those could be manifestations of burnout. And we have a culture where we think we just need to work harder, longer, faster. That's not always the issue. And as you can see the source at the bottom there, like I said, I don't swipe people's work. So another breakout. Which, if any of these indicators of burnout ring true with you? And it doesn't have to be your current emotion, but maybe it's colleague, maybe things you can just see and you go, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. All right, friends, we're all back. I forgot to give a quick shout out to GSI, keeping us caffeinated for lots of years. Oh, there we go. There's my mug. Deliciousness. So hope you had a good conversation about a really rough topic. And let's go into the rest of our discussion here. Just, I can change. I can force myself. I can will it away from me. So if burnout's walking around, look like it's going to crash on the couch for a few weeks, sleep out, just couch surf, what are you going to do? And make sure my cursor is actually working here. And be honest with yourself. This is super hard. Nobody's saying it should be easy.
Dr. Sam, do you want to share your screen again?
Yep.
Minor details.
Somebody popped up and said, hey, you know what? That would be awesome if y'all could see what I see, because what I see is so much fun. And that's now I can click my screen and we're ready to roll. So here we are. Be honest with yourself. And when you biff it, just say, hey, I made a mistake. Life lived, move it on. So it's super hard. Admitting burnout quickly moves to questioning your job, your career, because you think, if I can't adjust to this, if I can't manage my situation, am I even in the right spot? Do I belong here? And if that's your thinking, is it better to keep your script the way things are and accept that burnout is going to be a part of what you do? Or do you shock your system again, hopefully resolve the burnout? And it is an open and honest question, because some folks will say that change is scarier than just keeping with what they've got, even if what they got they know isn't working. So this is new as of this morning. Put it in early hours today. One of my friends sent me an article about how to do with burnout, but how to do with overworking. How overwork is literally killing us. And I think in US culture, we may be susceptible to this more than some cultures, but not all. There's a link if you could jot it down or however you want to review. I just want to make sure this is not my work. And this paragraph, I won't read it out loud, but the highlighted part, the bolded part, glorifying overwork to the point of burnout. So if you ask somebody how they are, do they ever say, you know what, life is good. I'm sleeping right, I'm eating right, I'm working just enough, family's happy, everything is wonderful. Most people will say something like living a dream, which is code for I don't want to answer. And if you tell somebody I'm not busy, they look at you like you just spoke a language they don't understand. And I've done that. And it's been weird. When I was being a student, somebody asked me how I was adjusting. I was maybe 3-4 months in. I said, my adjustment's great. I've got students I meet with, things are going well. I'm not getting called that often on nights and weekends, and I'm feeling pretty good. And their face said it all. They could not believe that I wasn't putting in 60, 70 hours a week. Didn't need to. It's not that necessary if we have support to not do that. And the WHO recognized burnout as an occupational phenomenon a couple of years ago, before the pandemic. So before everything else piled upon us, the WHO already said, this is a problem. And it is no small point that we take these pieces that equal burnout, and it has the physical manifestation, but also it's a cognitive issue, not in terms of thinking it through, but people often say, I don't do emotions at work. I don't do that fuzzy stuff. I don't deal with the humanity. Well, the humanity is who's doing the work. So maybe we should put a little focus on that, and editorial done. So it's be honest with yourself and care for your direct reports. Things you can look for: inability to concentrate. If somebody's easily upset or angered, and upset and angered, those could be two diverse things. It could be the same thing. Separate yourself from the group, the alienation, that diversion I mentioned early on with that super cool and absolutely scaled graphic, when they start to pull away, no longer part of the team, no longer part of the bigger picture. Cynicism. I've got cynical Sam. I bring cynical Sam out, kind of like the devil's advocate kind of argument. Cynical Sam, he's a polite guy, but he also says, okay, if this goes haywire, how are we going to deal with this? This cynicism is different. It is all cynic all the time. No room for things are actually looking good or ways to improve. Interactions. Think about your rock star employee doing so well all the time. You ask them what's going on, they say nothing. Or how are you? I'm fine. Folks, that's a flare. There's somebody who is changing behavior and usually highly engaged is saying, I got nothing to say. Go back to those burnout questions, start thinking about those, because it's people we need to be caring for to help them not get into the burnout and then fade out and no longer be a contributing member of our team. So this is us, right? This is people doing our thing. Be honest with your organization. And one data point, one time, one thing, maybe means new choices. One change is necessary. And I've got on the screen maybe a different employer. What that means is if somebody's super unhappy with work, because of their boss, which we said the data, that's a thing. Maybe a different employer is necessary. It shouldn't be the default response to, I happen to be not happy today. Multiple data points might indicate a culture issue. So if you've got a whole team that one person's unhappy and everybody else is doing okay, and they're genuinely doing okay, it may be the one person. But if you got multiple people saying that they can't manage their lives due to whatever stressors or timelines or projects or people, there may be something bigger here and maybe requiring more examination. One of the big pieces, and I mentioned this in Robin said so in the intro, empathy. I learned it. It took time, but I actually had to learn empathy because it was not my default setting. And that's what I talk about with burnout. From my point of view, in this very clinical and highbrow language, it sucks to see somebody so unhappy at their work, not because they're not going to do well or because we're not going to produce as much stuff or whatever the product is, but because they're showing up at least 8 hours a day, usually, and not having any kind of enjoyment or even fulfillment. It's exhausting. 40 hours a week spent not liking what's going on. It can be avoided. In most cases, it can be avoided. Now, again, it's a privilege to be able to like your work. I understand that. And that's different for everybody. That doesn't mean everybody wants the same job. There are people whose job, I would hate it. I would be no good and it wouldn't fulfill me in the slightest. And people would look at my job and they would rather pick any single other thing to do other than what I do. And that's perfectly fine. It's not to say there's better or worse jobs, there's better or worse fits for folks. And sometimes they lose hope. They have no why. If they can't figure out what their purpose is, why they matter. That's what's awful, because the burnout means that they've gone so far, so long without having had a good connection of some type to the supervisor, to the work, to the culture, that they're done. And that's so unfortunate, again, because most of these things are preventable. So let me explain. Burnout has physical responses, and that's now getting into insurance issues, never mind just the person having to deal with all these things. Physical responses to burnout, and of course, the emotional burden that it takes on. And the shocks, the constant shocks, it's demanding. If you don't know what's coming next, there's no way to prepare yourself for that change, that transition. So we talked about the pandemic, the changes, and even in the breakout room, what's the CDC going to say tomorrow? Yeah, I'm not putting down the CDC. It's just a lot of things to keep track of. Where you don't need a mask, you should wear a mask. Okay, now you definitely need a mask. Okay, now we don't need masks anymore. Well, maybe you should wear a mask in these situations. Tell you what, bring your mask, put it on your forehead, pull it down if you need it, put it back if you don't. That's what we'll do. I'm teasing me a little lighthearted, but it's hard. It's hard to keep track of all these things. Attain employee satisfaction, as you can see. If we're concerned about employee satisfaction, we're concerned about them as humans, we're concerned about the team, organization, the culture, and the long game. And that's where my brain always goes, is we can get a win, quote unquote, today, but where are we going in 6 years? What's down the road? Because if we can tell our people, hey, I see everybody's unhappy, here's an extra $50 bonus on your paycheck, that may go okay for a little bit, but it's not sustainable, because it won't last. People won't have a different emotion about showing up in a space they still don't like, because they have $50 more in their check account. So people are greater than the culture, which is greater than the organization. Without your people, no culture, no organization. And it's easy to overlook that by spending a lot of time and effort to make a really super cute mission statement that nobody understands, that nobody lives out, that doesn't mean anything, but it looks good on a quarterly report. So friends, we've got 9:09 on my clock. Go forth and be awesome. We have time for questions, comments, and tales. And what I'd like to do also is, if you've got some stories to tell from your breakout rooms, now's the time. We'd love to hear it. So I'm going to stop jabbering and let it turn over to the group, and let's just go willy-nilly.
Yeah, so I'll jump in first. It's as easy as this, guys. You just unmute yourself and you can jump in and start talking. Or if you would rather, you can also chat your questions or any comments, and I can read them out loud if you want me to. Really quick, guys, I did record today's workshop, so I can send the post-event recap email that has the recording link for anybody who would be like, oh, I'd like my other teammates or friend or something to watch this. You guys can share that link. And then Dr. Seam, is it okay if I also share your contact information so others can reach out post-event if they want to?
Oh, please do it. I'll unshare my screen as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll turn the floor over to anybody who wants to share questions, comments, stories, anything you learned.
Maybe I'll share
oh, yeah, go ahead, Dale, sorry.
maybe I'll just share a perspective. This might sound a little bit vague. In my particular job, I've got an awful lot of demands. I'm never caught up. Seems to be the culture of the organization. So prioritization is a real big deal, and knowing that I'm not going to get to certain things that I would prefer to have is a big deal. Maybe not having put the 100% into something that I would have preferred to, and I only put in 70%. And I think what happens is that I go through a process of acceptance with it's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do that. And you know what? It has nothing to do with me. This is the realistic way of doing it. I can't say that way of handling things is good in the long game necessarily, but in the short term, it helps me disassociate maybe my ego investment with the results of the work, and frees me up a little bit sometimes even creatively. And that's also a generalization in regard to my career trajectory. The more I am okay with myself in general, the less I get stressed out about specific results. So anyway.
That's so good. And the thing I hear in that too is not a euphemism for dying on a hill, slaying dragons. You're just talking about, can we make change? Can we not? And knowing that if we can't right now, well, we'll just put that aside and keep going the way we can. So that sounds like a pretty healthy response. I'm glad you shared. Thank you.
So something that I kind of struggle with sometimes is, I shared this a little bit in our second breakout earlier, but I feel like I'm kind of lucky where there hasn't been a lot of big changes as far as like I get to do the same type of work for the most part. What's really changed is that the team members are feeling burnt out, of course. And so what I'm trying to do is balance the act of help them feel engaged and find new ways to help them, but also not overworking them and understanding that deadlines can be pushed out a little bit here and there and stuff. But for some individuals, I try to work with them to figure out, yeah, is this really a good fit for them? Is this something that they actually like doing too, especially trying to break it down? Now is a good time to do that. But one thing that they sometimes struggle with too is that they don't want to make a big rash decision of, okay, this really isn't for me. I'm going to go do something else now, whether they leave to go to a different similar organization or something completely different. And then later on they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I just did that because of the pandemic and I shouldn't have done that. So I don't know if you have anything to add for that, or maybe I missed it, but that's something that I struggle with.
I will have a quick comment, and I also invite anybody else who has insights and observations to share as well. I've often advised folks to, if you're going to run to something, don't run from something. Know where you're going and know why you're going. And folks who maybe don't have a fit, there's a couple things in play. One is the sunk cost fallacy, which they say, I've been here so long, I may as well just keep on going. I've already got all this time invested. Why would I go now? Well, if you're going along a path that's not working out, then why go down the same path? But recognize that, and it sounds like that you have been. I'm not trying to suggest you haven't been doing this, but let people have their emotion about it. It's frustrating. It can be sad. It can be aggravating. And I think having folks hear that their emotions are theirs, and there's no reason to validate or invalidate. Just, yeah, you've got emotion. Of course you do. Of course. But how do we move forward, and how do we help you get to be in your best spot?
I'll just jump in. One thing I've noticed about myself personally is I don't feel as, so you might say driven, but you could also say frantic about, my job, how I'm performing, all of the little details. I just seem to be in a place where I'm just kind of, I show up, I'm doing the best I can. But if it's not a blockbuster day, it's okay. I guess some of that is coming from the fact that my son-in-law just passed away. My daughter is now widowed at the age of 45. I have a 17-year-old grandson who doesn't have a father. And it just has put a whole different perspective on life and on work. But here we are in this transition period with pandemic, and we don't know which way it's going to go.
Patty, thank you for sharing that. That's significantly personal. I'm glad you shared with the group, because that's kind of what we're dealing with this pandemic. Is this isn't just a do I work from home or do I not? It's a whole host of things that are going on. Another thing I heard that you mentioned was every day doesn't have to be blockbuster. I have a colleague who said if it's 51% good, it's good. So take those little wins and move on. That's a good approach you've got. And I think also, if I could, Tracy, I hate to call you out like this because you put something in the chat, which I'm glad you contributed, and your reward is being put in the spotlight. So could you give us a little more depth as to the coaching you've done the last 6 months?
Yeah, I work at a nonprofit, and we've just noticed that in the last 6 months, it's really starting to wear on people. We have very low turnover, but I've noticed a pattern that we've been doing an awful lot more coaching out than I feel like I've ever done before. Before it would be, maybe once every couple of years. And I've done 4 in the last 6 months, where it was individuals that were, like you said, they weren't bad employees. They weren't bad people. It just was no longer a good fit for them. And so helping them, work through that and see that, very tactfully, without coming out and being like, you don't belong here anymore, you need to go somewhere else. But, helping them find where their heart's taking them, or where their true passion lies. So they're not just, heating up a seat. Find out where you do want to be, where you do want to warm a chair up at.
Cool. Thanks for taking my so subtle invitation to come
Yeah.
share out with the group.
And I'll jump in if that's okay. And, just to kind of piggyback on a lot of the things we've talked about. Andrew spoke a little bit ago, and he's my peer. So we always kind of, bounce off each other with ideas and things. And having a, financial institution branches, our employees are frontline. They're the ones that are truly there for the pandemic. They're the ones that are receiving all of the stress from all of the members when they have to enforce a mask mandate, when someone's mad. So they absorb so much. And then, our jobs truly have full time changed from all of our standard duties to just being here for our people and motivating them and making them happy. And during that time, it's hard to identify if it's truly a fit or not, because you have to take into consideration that this is a very unique situation. And so unfortunately, performance isn't where it should be, right? But, I find for me that I spend most of my time with the empathy and the consideration. And in the process, for lack of a better phrase, I've self-sacrificed myself to where I go home at night and I'm just beat. Because I really care. I really care about all of them. And it's hard sometimes to go, oh, what about me? Because that's our role as a manager. But at the same time, how efficient are you not taking care of yourself?
Right. So that's the big warning flare, right? When you're exhausted and there's not much you can do about it. So people will say, engage in self-care. And so take off 30 minutes early. Okay. It's a whole lot more than that. It's giving yourself time to be yourself and to not be, to quote a phrase from Seinfeld, not to be on all the time. It's okay to shut down, just be your authentic self somewhere where that makes sense for you. And if you're having a garbage day at work, sometimes we do hide it. Sometimes we can say, today's rough. And it's acknowledging that you're not a super person. You're just doing your best to help folks get through. And if I could ask you to unpack too, Haley, the keeping people motivated and happy. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
I've learned that since this started that I've changed what that definition is for myself. I realize how complex their jobs are and what their responsibilities are. So I always acknowledge that pretty often. But now it's even physical things, even if it's something like a box of Cheez-Its because they love Cheez-Its, or walking out there and saying, I just heard that conversation and that was really great. A lot of those things, but I'm doing it more and I'm making sure that those are genuine interactions. But in the process, it also allows me to see if they're willing to open up a little bit to find out what the source of it is. And I find that truly, I think they're tired. And we don't overwork anyone. They work their standard full-time or part-time shifts just like before. But I think about all of that they're taking in from the general public on a daily basis. And I can't even imagine, and it's like, what else can you do to have them realize how important they are, even if you're saying that directly?
That's a great point. It's not just about the hours spent, it's about the stress taken on. And I think that can be easily missed if we're not paying attention.
I'm going to piggyback on that, Haley. We're in performance evaluation season in our organization. And as I sat down to write those this year, I'm thinking the word of the year for performance evaluation is grace. Just looking at, as we're looking at what people accomplished or didn't accomplish, I think we have to weigh in and acknowledge all the oddness that people have worked through this year. So I think you're doing a great job of recognizing your employees, and I hope everybody's able to do that in this season.
Thank you.
Susan, of course, not to speak for you, but that notion of grace, I think, is A, huge, and B, a lot of companies, not the tiny ones, but a lot of companies did just fine throughout the pandemic. So if we can offer people some grace and some flexibility and not really hurt that bottom line too much, then why isn't it a matter of practice at this point? I think there's room for that conversation. I would hope there's room for that conversation.
Yeah, and I think when we did our evaluations for our team members last month, 2 months ago, at least I felt like I gave the team a lot of grace. And then when my boss gave me grace, when I got my review from her, I actually felt like she gave me more grace than I deserved, which was incredible. It was just such a nice, like, fresh of breath air. And it just was, yeah, it was incredible. So I think that goes a long way.
And I think I would add that it's been challenging for me. I said this before in the breakout session. I'm extremely grateful that my team was able to start working from home, but to motivate them to want to come back in the office now. And we've lost some of that connection. And I have heard team members say, oh, it feels good to be back in the office. I feel more motivated now. And that's great for some, but some now are even less motivated because they love being at home. They don't want to get up and get ready and come into the office. And so to find a job that you can do that is going to be easier for them now. And so I think people are seeking that. A lot of people are anyway. And reevaluating through all the things that have happened and people losing their lives and losing loved ones. Like, how important is my job to me now? How can I be more present? So I think that's been challenging. And even for myself personally, like how hard do I want to work through this life that could be so short?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. The calculus of what work is and should be, I think, has been turned on, upside down, and that's can be healthy. And there'll be some roles and positions that require on-site, presence, but others that have flexibility. Some jobs I've heard, you're working from home, but you're logged into the company server, and you better be moving your mouse all the time because we're tracking you. And if you're not moving your mouse, you're not getting paid. So 8 hours of the machine, wiggling your mouse, make sure you're getting compensated when your work is done 3 hours into it. That's not quite healthy either. So there's definitely room to breathe and grow and to make folks know and understand that they matter, they have purpose, and they're valued.
I'll pause for just a couple more seconds. I know it can get awkward in the virtual world when there's a pause, but I'll just see if anybody wants to hop in, ask a question, share a comment. This has been really good dialogue. And I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, it's just a topic that we needed to discuss today. So I'm thankful that you guys all joined together. So I'll pause for that pause I was talking about.
Well, that's an important skill to learn, to be comfortable with silence.
I can definitely say I'm still learning it because that was uncomfortable for me. See, it looks like perfect, guys. Okay, so a lot of you have to start running for another meeting. We are starting to wrap up on the 9:30. So I'll just go ahead and close. I want to take a minute. You guys all have reactions. So if you want to clap, you can toggle at the bottom of your screen and do a little clapping emoji for our speaker today, Dr. Sam. Thank you so much for just taking the time to connect and share with us today. And like I mentioned, I'll include his a copy of his presentation and then his contact information as well. And that post event recap email that I'll send out. On the screen now, you guys will see a series of upcoming events. I invite you all to come out. A lot of them are still virtual. All of them are still virtual. That will be shifting in the near future with probably some hybrid options that allow you to connect in person if you're comfortable. But I just want to highlight Friday, June 11th, we are starting the process to update the SEDS process. And Dale, Cassidy, Rachel, one of you GSI folks that are on here, SEDS stands for Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, correct? Perfect. So really, this is not something that GSI does. This is something we do together as a community. And the purpose of this is it helps us to move forward and put our best economic foot forward, so to say. And it helps us to just kind of look at the future and say, okay, as Spokane region, what do we want to be? Like, what kind of business do we want to retain and grow and attract? And then even the workforce and the people, like you guys said, you look at your jobs now and you don't know, you know that life is short. So let's make Spokane the best Spokane we can. And so we're going to be kicking off that process on Friday, June 11th. So I invite you guys all to come out for that. But once again, thank you, Dr. Sam, and thank you, Numerica, for sponsoring today. And I hope you guys all have a lovely Wednesday.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.